Forget sea monsters and giant sharks. The true horror of the deep often comes from within, or from the unexplainable voids that surround solitary men in the ocean's black heart. Luis Ortega wasn't the kind of fisherman who rattled easily. He'd worked offshore since he was 16, spending more of his life on water than on land. But in 2018, while working a solo assignment on a small, long-line vessel off the coast of Chile, something happened that he still refuses to discuss unless he's had at least 2 drinks. He remembers the exact day the ocean went quiet. It was the 4th night of his run. Clear weather, low wind, calm tides, the sort of night fishermen pray for. Luis had just finished checking the lines when something struck him as wrong. At first, he couldn't place it. The engine hummed, the waves tapped the hull, but the life of the ocean was gone. No gulls, no splashes, no distant creaking from the shifting water. It was as if the sea had stopped breathing. Luis leaned over the side of the boat. The water was unnaturally still, a dark mirror reflecting only a sliver of moonlight. He felt something, a pressure in his ears, like the muted silence that follows a deep dive. Except he was on the surface. He told himself it was just a weather front. Then, out of nowhere, the boat shuddered. Not from impact, not from a wave, but as if something below had pushed up beneath it in a slow, deliberate lift. Luis stumbled, gripping the rail. He waited for the rise of a swell or the surge of a surfacing whale. Anything. But the water stayed flat, perfectly smooth. The pressure in his ears intensified. His breath came out shaky. He called out into the dark. "Quien anda ahí?" No answer, yet the air felt heavy, as if the ocean itself was listening. A few minutes later, the humming started, a faint vibration beneath his feet, not mechanical, not natural. It was a low, resonant tone that seemed to come from the water itself. Luis described it later as a voice with no words, like the ocean was trying to speak through my bones. He backed away from the railing. The vibration traveled through the deck, through the metal rails, through his teeth. Then, just as he reached the cabin, he heard a sound that didn't belong on any fishing boat. A whisper, soft, directly behind him, calling his name. Luis. He spun around, heart hammering. No one was there. Not a shadow, not a ripple. The humming stopped. The pressure in his ears vanished. And the ocean, all at once, came back to life. Waves rolled, wind moved. A gull cried in the distance. For a moment, Luis convinced himself he had imagined everything. Isolation messes with the mind. Everyone knows that. But then he checked his equipment. Every single fish on his long line, over 200 hooks, had been eaten clean, stripped to bone. No tearing, no struggle, no heads, no tails, just gleaming white vertebrae dangling in the moonlight. He'd set those lines barely an hour earlier. Nothing in those waters feeds in total silence. Nothing feeds that fast. Luis cut the lines immediately. He didn't bother rolling them in. He fired up the engine and steered toward shore, pushing the vessel harder than he ever had. But 20 minutes into the trip back, he felt the pressure return. ... The humming rose again, stronger this time, and beneath the boat, he sensed movement. Not an animal, something bigger, something that didn't swim, but glided. The tracking sonar flickered to life on its own. A single shape appeared on the screen, massive, featureless, keeping perfect pace beneath him. Luis refused to look overboard. He kept his eyes locked on the horizon until the shoreline lights appeared hours later. Only then did the pressure fade, the humming disappear. When he finally docked, the sonar log showed nothing. The lines he'd cut were missing from the deck, and the metal railing he had leaned over was warm to the touch, like a hand had been pressed against it. Luis quit deep-sea solo runs after that. He said the silence under the ocean that night wasn't emptiness. He said it felt like attention. Most deep-sea tales drift between superstition and solitude, but the second account in our series stands apart. Because unlike the first story's silence and unseen force, this one left something behind. Something physical. Something no one could explain. Not even the researchers who examined it. This is the story fishermen near Greenland still whisper about. The nets that shouldn't have held anything. In 2016, a small commercial crew operated off the Greenland shelf, an area known for brutal weather and even stranger currents. The trawler Northwind was manned by 3 seasoned fishermen, but the incident centered on their net operator, a man named Eric. He was the most experienced among them, steady, quiet, always precise. On the 3rd day of their expedition, the sea had been unforgiving. Harsh winds, rolling waves, a blinding, overcast sky that made day and night almost indistinguishable. By dawn, the storm calmed just enough for Eric to drop the deep trawl net. Thousands of feet below, everything felt normal. The descent, the drift, the tension on the line, until it wasn't. Halfway through the haul, the winch struggled, not in a way that suggested a heavy catch, but as if something below was resisting, almost pulling back. At first, Eric assumed the net had snagged on a ridge or a submerged boulder. But as the crew monitored the tension gauge, something became clear. The readings didn't behave like rock. They were rhythmic, a slow, pulsing drag, then stillness, then the drag again. It felt alive. The crew exchanged glances, each man suddenly aware of the unnatural pattern. Still, Eric kept the retrieval going, expecting torn netting or a false snag. But when the net broke the surface, the men fell completely silent, because inside it wasn't fish, nor debris, nor anything that should exist in freezing waters at that depth. The net held a single mass. Pale, smooth, gelatinous, almost spherical, but not exactly. Its surface wasn't flesh. It wasn't ice. It wasn't anything they could name. Worse, it wasn't still. The thing quivered, like it were reacting to air itself. No one wanted to touch it. The crew backed away as Eric examined it with a pole. The moment the pole brushed the surface, the mass reacted, contracting sharply, as if recoiling from pain or fear. Then it split. Not open, not apart. It simply divided itself, seamlessly, silently, into 2 smaller, identical forms that throbbed on the deck like beating hearts. Eric swore they changed color when the wind hit them. From pale gray to a faint, almost bioluminescent green. The men panicked. No one thought to record it. The fear was primal. Every instinct screamed that this thing, or these things, did not belong in the world they understood. And then came the worst part. As the boat rocked gently, the divided masses began moving. Not rolling, not sliding, crawling, barely, but undeniably, inching across the metal surface, as if drawn toward the dark openings at the deck's edge. The captain made the only decision he could. He ordered them back into the sea. Eric and another crewman used long gaffs to push the writhing shapes overboard. The moment they hit the water, they dissolved. Not melted, dissolved, becoming part of the sea in seconds, leaving no trace except a faint green current drifting beneath the boat. When the north wind returned to port, the crew tried to explain what they'd hauled up. Scientists reviewed the net fragments. Some strands were etched with a pattern, tiny hexagonal impressions, as if the mass had gripped the net with microscopic suction. But no organism known to science could have done that. The report filed months later was simple: unknown biological entity. Further study inconclusive. Eric never fished the deep shelf again. If the first account challenged sanity and the second challenged biology, then the third, it challenges reality itself. And what he encountered out there wasn't silent. It wasn't physical. It was aware. These aren't just individual nightmares. They're threads in a darker tapestry woven by the ocean's unyielding grip on the human psyche. Each story pulling us deeper, closer to something the surface world was never meant to witness. Some deep-sea encounters leave physical evidence. Others leave silence. But this final story, it leaves something worse. Memory. A memory that corrodes slowly, like salt water eating through steel. This is the account of Miles Rourke, the only fisherman in his fleet to quit the profession overnight. His journals detail events so psychologically disturbing that even marine researchers refused to comment publicly. He called it "the night the ocean showed me its eyes." In 2021, Miles was assigned to a solo monitoring mission in the Philippine Trench, one of the deepest places on Earth. His job was simple: check the deep-sea monitoring buoys and collect footage from the autonomous cameras below. These missions were usually mind-numbing, but on the second night, something changed. The first sign was the current. Miles reported that the water around his small vessel suddenly shifted, not violently, but intentionally. He described it as a slow tightening, like the boat had been caught in a massive hand closing around it. But the sky was clear, the waves calm. Nothing on the surface explained the pulling sensation he felt under his feet. He ignored it until the cameras began to malfunction. One by one, the feed from the deep-sea monitors blinked white, then black. Static. Fine, it happened. But then the static began to pulse, not randomly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Miles tried to override the system, but the images kept returning in the same pattern. White, black, white, black. A slow, deliberate pulse, perfectly timed. Then, on the fourth pulse, the screen didn't go white. It showed something else. A shape, not a creature. At least, not in any recognizable sense. The footage displayed an enormous curved surface, like the side of a monolith carved from obsidian, drifting upward from the abyssal dark. Miles thought it was an equipment glitch, until he saw the texture. Ridges. Deep, repeating ridges. Almost like the patterns on a fingerprint. Except each ridge stretched hundreds of feet. Before he could process it, the camera feed distorted again. The image wavered, and the ridges moved. Not from current, not from impact, but as if the structure itself were breathing. The deck vibrated beneath Miles' boots. A low hum rose from the hull. The same unnatural resonance that had shaken ships in other accounts across decades. And then the ocean went black. Every wave, every gleam, every shimmer of moonlight vanished instantly, as if consumed by shadow. Miles wrote in his journal that he felt the darkness, not just saw it, felt it pressing against the boat, testing it, inspecting it. He froze. The hum stopped, the water stilled, and then, deep below, he saw it. Two faint glimmers, not lights, not reflections, eyes. Miles described them as impossibly far apart, shining with the same cold light as deep-sea bioluminescence. They did not move like an animal's eyes. They didn't blink or dart or react. They simply stared upward, unblinking, unthinkably enormous. He said the gaze felt surgical, like whatever was watching him wasn't curious. It was evaluating him. The eyes grew brighter, widening in the darkness until the entire ocean beneath the boat glowed faintly. The hum returned, louder this time, echoing inside his skull. He stumbled backward, covering his ears, but the sound wasn't in the air. It was inside him. It was inside him. Hours later, Miles woke to sunlight and calm water. His equipment was dead. The cameras fused. The sonar burnt out. Everything that could record evidence was destroyed. But his journal, handwritten, sealed in a waterproof pouch, survived. The final sentence he wrote before collapsing ended mid-word. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking through. Every attempt to retrieve camera data from that night failed. Researchers called it electromagnetic surge damage. But Miles insisted no machine caused it. He never returned to sea. He never looked at open water again. He said some things weren't meant to rise from the trench, not even as shadows. And whatever watched him that night wasn't rising. It was waiting. 3 men. 3 encounters oceans apart. Yet their experiences form a single question. What lies beneath the point where pressure crushes steel and sunlight never reaches? The ocean has always dwarfed human understanding, but these stories remind us of something deeper. Our minds weren't built for the abyss, not for the silence, not for the unseen, not for the feeling of being watched by something that does not need a name. Some waters keep their secrets, others whisper them back.